they started off in the Negro League. So please help me educate my audience as well as.
Well, once again, remember, I'm the kind of person, on that first tour, I did go and visit Buck Leonard, right? Mm-hmm. But I also went to visit Joe Green down in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Matter of fact, I can tell people I had the pleasure of pulling up in Stone Mountain, Georgia, about 3 in the morning. I had an 8 o'clock interview with Joe Green, and I slept in my car in Stone Mountain, Georgia. But anyway, but people weren't interviewing Joe Green for the most part. And, they would pick the guys who were in the Hall of Fame, like say a Satchel Paige, and then people would come up to me and they said, well, it's too bad Satchel Paige didn't get in the major leagues. And, and I have to correct them that it's too bad thousands of players didn't get in the major leagues, who are African-American, because Satchel is not the only one would have made a difference. And Satchel himself would have told you there were lots of Satchels. Matter of fact, he was quoted as saying that. He wasn't the only Satchel. He saw lots of good ball players and who never had a chance to be a Satchel. So I wanted to interview those guys. But, in every town of any size, especially where there's an African-American community, there is going to be some kind of heritage of black baseball there. I'll give you a good example. Today I was talking to a gentleman. He lived in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and it's down there by Sikeston, Missouri, that kind of thing. And and I was talking to him, and he lived there all his life. And I said, hey, did you know, I'm trying to think, Kirby Puckett. I said, did you know Kirby Puckett's dad lived down in New Madrid? He said, no, I've never heard that before. And when he never heard it, but Kirby Puckett's dad was a baseball player in New Madrid, Missouri. And when you come to New Madrid, there's no sign, there's nothing to let you know. This is just history that's been handed down, and and I try to get as much as I can in the books, unique things that are not people wouldn't think about as being history, and I try to get them in the books, that kind of thing. So every town has that history. Every town, middle-sized town, some very small towns have baseball players and baseball history. It is truly America's game if we talk about it in that way.
That's awesome. Do you have any? Are there any Negro League artifacts in the new African American Museum in Mississippi, or the one that's in D.C., or the one that's on the West Coast? What are they doing in regards to the Negro Leagues, or is this again a forgotten situation or overlooked situation, not even forgotten?
Well, I know years ago the Smithsonian did something on the Negro Leagues. This back in maybe 81, 82, because I lent some items to them. So they were trying to do some things way back. Now, I haven't been to the new African American Museum. I haven't been to Washington yet because I'm finishing up a 200-city tour. I have to tell you about that in a moment. But yeah, I'm sure they have something, and I'm willing to donate some things to make sure that they do have some things. And one of these days, I'm gonna donate all my writings to somewhere. And I'm actually on my 9th book. I finished book 10, 11, and 12. I just haven't released them yet.
Okay.
So
talk to me about the tour, and then let me know about these books that you wrote.
Okay. Well, the tour started in 2013. I was sitting around, I was looking at the world, and I was looking at how race relations were deteriorating and that kind of thing. And I knew that baseball transcended all kind of nationalities and economics bases and things like that. So I decided, I want to take my unique way of delivering baseball and show that diversity and equality really does work. And so I decided, instead of going to, like cities, like a St. Louis or Detroit or a big city like that, I was going to go to small communities. And I was going to try to build a better relationship between races. And so I started off in a little town called Osawatomie, Kansas, and it worked pretty good. I think after then I went to Iola, Kansas, and it worked. And then I jumped across to Missouri, went to Warrensburg, and so it just kept growing. So finally, it started off as going to be a tribute to the Kansas City Monarchs' 90th anniversary of their first World Championship, and that's how I picked 90 cities. and I finished the 90, and it was still going good, and people wanted to hear the program. So I have about 30 cities to go, and I would have finished 200 cities, including I've driven every place, so I know the landscape. I know how the teams traveled. I know where they played, and I even have driven to Canada from Kansas City. So, I've been through the South. I've been to Mississippi. I've been up through Zanesville, Ohio in the east, and all over Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska. And it's just been a wonderful, it's just been amazing the people I've met and experiences I have, and I hope to write about those as well. It's been grand. Even in these difficult times, people wouldn't expect me to show up in some of these small towns, but God has really blessed me to to go there and meet wonderful people who care about baseball, who care about race relations, and some people are just curious, who is this guy? What's he going to talk about? But they leave, I think, with a different sense of that we all need to work together.
Awesome. And that's good, because at some point you have to stop looking at what I look like, and you need to start respecting what I bring to the table. And when you bring, and I think it's important for young people, because for whatever reason, I think in our community, we look at athletes because we see so many negative images of these young men, and we go, hey, no, you don't have to be like them, you don't have to be this, and you don't have to be that. But when you look at the Negro Leagues, these are pioneers. These are a living example of you don't have to give up no matter what's going on around you. Giving up is not an option. And I think your work and work like yours is important. So, thank you again. Now, your books. Talk to me about your writings.
Yeah, actually, the first book I released was called the Kansas City Baseball Trivia Quiz Book, and that was kind of it used to be when they would write about, say, the Negro Leagues, or the major leagues, minor leagues, it would all be separate. So once again, me thinking like I do, I'm always trying to unify people. I put the Royals, the Kansas City A's, I've had the Kansas City Monarchs, the Kansas City Blues, who are a minor league team here, and I put them all in one book and wrote it in trivia form. And it was very successful as well. But it had that concept of bringing all these things together as one history, baseball history. And then that book went very well. And then my second book is called The Negro Baseball Leagues of Photographic History. It won the best baseball book of the year. And there were 140 baseball books that came out that year. And it was a photographic history, but it has a good text in it, photographic history. And matter of fact, I remember a writer from the Baltimore Sun said it's a feat that will never be duplicated. And that was 92, and here we are 2018. It has not been duplicated. And then from there, let's see, I wrote a biography about Wilbur Bullet Rogan, who I happen to think is the greatest all-around baseball player that ever lived. I wrote
Say his name again, please.
Wilbur Bullet Rogan, the greatest all-around baseball player that ever lived. I put him up against Babe Ruth any day of the week.
Bullet Rogan,
Rogan, Rogan.
Rogan. Okay.
Yeah.
And
you know what? And there's never been a Major League Baseball player by the name of Rogan. How about that? So he's easy to find, Rogan, Rogan. But I wrote a book about him, and he played for the Kansas City Monarchs. But this guy, he hit over 400 home runs, and won over 400 games as a pitcher, too. And he was a 10-second man. He could run you a 100-yard dash in less than 10 seconds. Now, Babe Ruth couldn't do that, could he?
Man was the Bo Jackson of his day.
Yeah, but he was only 5'7", and weighed about 150 pounds. He was a welterweight. But which is another interesting thing. Another interesting thing is I'm also pretty astute on boxing history as well, and I have a book that I'm working on Jack Johnson that I'm about finished with, and I've got another one on the lightweight division. A boxer who came from my community named Tommy Campbell, who should have been a world champion, but the mob ripped him off.
Oh, we know about that. And speaking of that, Jack Johnson was just recently exonerated. His name was just registered in the realm of being a respectable man and not a criminal.
Yeah, and Jack Johnson, if I have to mention the black athletes that I think that really changed the culture, and probably not in this order, but Jack Johnson is going to be one of them. Joe Louis is going to be another one. Andrew Rube Foster, president of the Negro National League, great player. He's going to be another one. And so, today people think about Michael Jordan, those kind of people, but every generation has had someone who was larger than everyone else. And of course, Jack Johnson was that person, being the first black heavyweight champion. But he was a true champion, and but the world didn't like him for being a champion. So he had to fight against a whole society of people just to try to hold that title. But he was outstanding, great defensive fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can talk a whole lot about Jack Johnson. Let's do that again.
we'll
have to do that, huh?
Yeah, hey, keep talking. I'm listening because I've heard wonderful things about Jack Johnson. Like when Joe Louis was about to fight MacMillian, he was going to show him how to defeat Mac in the initial fight, and he was jettisoned. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. They didn't want him connected. They didn't want him connected with Joe Louis. So, if he ever met with Joe Louis really and gave him any tips, they had to meet secretly, I'm almost sure.
They wouldn't allow him to speak at all.
Yeah. Well, here's something. When he fought Jim Jeffries in July 4th, 1910, he beat Jim Jeffries. Those fight films were confiscated by the government.
Oh, wow.
And were not released until 1938. So 1910 to 1938, you couldn't see those fight films. Now, you can go out now and you can see them on YouTube, but people don't realize that in America at that time, you couldn't see that fight. They didn't want you to see that fight. But,
they
you
knew
could read
he was
about
going to lose.
Well, I tell you what, many people, Jack Johnson said, hey, bet all your money on me. He said, just don't pick the round. And the rest of the world, they who betted on Jim Jeffries, well, they lost a lot of money that day.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. They should.
Yeah, by the way, which is, something else I'm writing, that July 4th, 1910, was the bloodiest day in American sports history, period.
Please educate us.
It was Jack Johnson, when he won that fight, black people began to celebrate all across America. And people resented them for that. These were non-African Americans. And so fights broke out, and they started killing people. And so it became a bloody night, a very bloody night. And, you can find out little dabs about it, but there's a lot more to that story. But it's definitely the bloodiest night in American sports history.
That is insane. That's truly insane. Well, tell us a little more about boxing. We cover all sports. I have a boxing expert. I have we do baseball, basketball. Please tell us more about boxing because, again, this is another realm where you only know Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali, and, we know from Muhammad Ali because we were here, but most people, those are the only, if you looked in boxing, if you just grazed over boxing, you would think those are only four prominent black fighters in the world. Educate us on this too. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn.
Yeah, well, the book I'm writing about, and it's basically finished. It's just at the editing point. And I'll tell you how it came about. I lived in a community of boxers, and my oldest brother was a professional boxer. You can go in and they have a boxersrec.com. His name is right there, Howard Dixon. My cousin was a professional boxer, and my brother was a welterweight, and my cousin was a lightweight. But across the street from me, and he was grown by that time, there was an older lady named Miss Campbell. And people used to say her son was a tremendous boxer. And so that's what I heard growing up. And they said, well, something happened, and he never